Reminder of the websites that you can go to find out more information, to link to these webinars if you want to share them with other people, and then to link to any of the resources that we talk about. So abingdonpress.com / gospel discipleship, gospeldiscipleship.net, and then ministrymatters.com / gospel discipleship is where the assessment is. Okay, let's step through again, just covering where we've been. Remember that we started out talking about this whole understanding comes from the last words that Jesus speaks in each of the Gospels, and that gives us a lens through which we might see and understand 4 different ways of living out our discipleship, which seems to apply on some way in some mixes for everyone. And then we have covered the Markans, who are inspired by the Holy Spirit. We've covered Mattheans, who are driven by action. We have talked about Lucans, who are centered around relationships. And this week we get to talk about our mentor, apprentice, nurtured Johannines. Next week we will talk about how you bring this to your team, how you bring this to your church, how you bring this to your conference, all of those things. So we'll have a couple of folks that will talk about what they're doing in order to bring gospel discipleship in. And towards the end to middle of tonight, we're also going to figure out which churches we're going to talk about for that as well. And so that's where we have been. And so let's get to talking about John tonight. So where John ends, and I just gave a smidge of this last passage, but really it's this whole scene where Jesus and Peter are at the lake shore, and Jesus has asked Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter responds, "You know I do." And then Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." They have this 3-time back and forth from that, and then Jesus talks about the cost of following him and what that will mean, but nonetheless he needs Peter to follow him. And so then Peter responds, he sees the beloved disciple walking on the beach. And he says, when Peter saw this disciple, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain until I come, what difference does that make to you? You must follow me." And what is important about this whole scene is that, first of all, Jesus is meeting Peter where he is. He's actually addressing a past struggle that Peter had, which was that he denied Jesus 3 times. So Peter is given the opportunity to say to Jesus 3 times that he loves him. So he gets an opportunity, a kind of one-on-one opportunity to be healed of that past struggle, and to then be invited to move forward in his discipleship. And it happens in this basically where Jesus says, "This is what I need you to do." And then Peter's response is, "What about that guy?" And Jesus' response is, "I want you to forget about that guy. This is what I need you to do. I need you to follow me." And so what we see here is that this is very much this one-on-one, crafted particularly around this relationship between Jesus and Peter. And we see these one-on-one conversations throughout the Gospel of John. So what we get modeled for us in the Gospel of John is very much this mentor-apprentice understanding of growing in our discipleship. So we look at the characteristics of the Gospel of John. That very first one is the one we need to point out. There are so many one-on-one conversations. Remember that John is not the synoptics. The synoptics are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they share a great deal of material together. John, I think it's over 90% of the Gospel of John is original to the Gospel of John. It only happens there. So it's a very different feel from the synoptic Gospels, and so much of what happens are in these individual conversations, everything from Nicodemus and Jesus meeting under the cover of darkness and a teacher actually teaching a teacher in that space, to the woman at the well being met by Jesus in unusual circumstances, but again, very individual circumstances. Jesus sees in her what she can be and sort of commissions her as the first evangelist there to go around and witness to who she's the first person that he tells he's the Messiah. And she gets to carry that witness out to other folks. Even things like in a crowded scene like the raising of Lazarus, he goes first to Martha, then to Mary, and then to Lazarus, has these kind of very individual moments, and even has a very close conversation with Pilate at the end, where Pilate gets to sort of come to a deeper understanding of what is truth. So that the Gospel of John is just framed one after the other, after the other, after the other, of these very close interpersonal one-on-one conversations with Jesus. Another distinctive characteristic of the Gospel of John is this character of the beloved disciple, which is assumed to be John. It's never named. The beloved disciple is never specifically named, but it's assumed that the beloved disciple and the author of the Gospel are the same, one and the same. And this is really that very close, intimate relationship between Jesus and one of his disciples. And it starts to be developed around chapter 13. That's when there's this mentioning of the beloved disciple that comes in. And it's in very close, very personal, very critical moments in the story of Jesus that the beloved disciple is mentioned, including at the end. That's the beloved disciple that Peter is asking about in those last words. And then there is teaching in the Gospel of John, but it's different than, say, the teaching in Matthew. Matthew, we talked about, was filled with Jesus's teachings. John is also filled with teaching, but they're very particular teachings. Instead of, in Matthew, Jesus is sort of teaching us how to live into the kingdom, right? These are the parables of the kingdom. I'm teaching you about the kingdom. This is what you need to do to be in the kingdom. In John, Jesus is teaching about himself. I am the way, I am the good shepherd, I'm the gate, I'm the bread. It's all helping you have a deeper understanding of who Jesus is, so that the focus is on that model, this individual model for how to be. And it's very personal and very much structured around this person of Jesus. And then there is a push in the Gospel of John and in Johannine literature, especially when you bring in the letters, to love each other. And then others, there's a little bit of a distinction between insider and outsider in John. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute here. But certainly Jesus specifically says love one another instead of love God and love neighbor and love yourself. Jesus specifically says, this is the new commandment that I give you, love one another. And there's all this tension in the beginning of there are those that accepted Jesus and they're children of the light, they're in the family of God, and then there are those that didn't, and they're outside of that. So there is a sort of privileging of those who are following Jesus, those who are within the brothers and sisters, those who are part of the family in the Johannine literature. And then Jesus is very much the exalted one. This Gospel of John has the highest Christology, or the highest theology around Jesus, in the sense that Jesus is very clearly the Son of God. There is no question about that in the Gospel of John. It's not proclaimed to be anything other than that. Even Jesus's crucifixion is an exaltation. And so Jesus is very much elevated above Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels. Okay, I don't know why this keeps doing that, but so let's talk about what those characteristics of John, then how they give rise to these Johannines, right? So if we look at the characteristic of the exalted Christ and the teaching being around the person of Jesus, then for Johannines very much anchor themselves around Jesus as the central teacher or example. They look primarily to Jesus. Now, I don't want to imply that the other types don't look to Jesus. We do. We tend to have, it's just a little bit more individual focus. It's just kind of like a laser focus from a Johannine perspective, as opposed to this sort of spreading out, sort of more Trinitarian theology. But really are looking for Jesus as the central teacher and example. Johannines are fine that there is a hierarchy of learning. There's a hierarchy of understanding. There's a hierarchy to all of this. Jesus is at the top, and how we know about Jesus is from Scripture. So Scripture is right below that. And then how we learn about Scripture and Jesus is usually from our pastor. So usually pastor is right below that. And then sometimes another leader that's significant to a Johannine can also be an important figure as well. But they're very much going to look for this hierarchy of these are the top ones that we want to learn from. As a result, they do expect their leaders to be strong moral examples. They expect leaders to exemplify Christ, right? So you are going to, as well as you can, live as if Christ is your model and step into that model. So really have high expectations on leaders. Really want them to be the absolute best they can possibly be. So a spiritual crisis for a Johannine is the fall of a great leader or the absence of strong leadership. Someone who doesn't kind of step into that and sort of own that position will frustrate a Johannine. Okay, when it comes to these one-on-one conversations and the elevation of the beloved disciple, it's important to Johannines to learn at the feet of a master. They very much want to sit and listen, and they would love to be one of the 12, but even more than that, love to be the beloved disciple. Right? Like, good. If we could just you could get at the feet of the master, that would be perfect. And if in the absence of being able to do that, these are the folks that will latch onto a pastor, and especially one that they really respect and admire, because they will see that person as a great teacher that they can learn from there. Johannines are lifelong learners of all types and all kinds. Sometimes that's formal schooling, sometimes it's not, but they just have this hunger to learn. And different than Mattheans. Mattheans love to learn in order to be able to put things into action. Johannines love to learn because it turns them into a different person. It shapes who they are instead of necessarily leading to specific actions like Mattheans would look for. It gives them a wisdom that they're grateful to have and they're seeking. These are deep students of the Bible. These are the folks that will spend 8 hours preparing a 30-minute Sunday school lesson because they are absolutely deeply committed to that. And also, they're usually fantastic teachers, but they're only going to teach if they feel expert on something. So they will not step forward until they know what they're talking about because they have these high expectations for anyone that stands up and proclaims. They are also gifted at reaching youth, and it's because of this interest in mentoring someone into whatever new role they need to be mentored into. And youth almost always, at least the ones that I've tested, test primarily or secondarily Johannine, and I think it's a stage of life thing. School is a very Johannine structure, so it's very similar for them and understandable, but also they are trying to figure out how to be adults, and they're looking for models for that. So Johannines can be particularly gifted at stepping into that role because they're passionate about that kind of learning. Okay, when it comes to loving each other, but question mark on the others, it comes from their standards. It's not, it sounds exclusive, but it's more true to Johannines to say that they have expectations for someone who's going to follow Jesus. You're not just going to sit there and be lazy about it, so to speak. You're going to hold yourself to a high standard if you're going to follow Jesus, and those that hold themselves to a high standards are welcomed into the community, and they'll welcome other folks, but they're just going to be expectations that you're not just going to come in the doors and sit there. You need to commit yourself to learning and growing in your faith, and that will help you be then nurtured forward. It can come off as arrogant. In the book, I talk about they get accused of the humble brag all the time. And actually, there's a really funny moment behind the scenes in the video. Doug, who we will meet next week, said, I don't think I come off that way. And I just started laughing. I mentored Doug. I was like, oh, Doug, God bless you. So, but it's simply that it's not so much arrogant as it is deep commitment. They're just really passionate about these standards that they have and these expectations, and so they hold themselves to it, but they hold others to it as well. So be ready for that with Johannines. Okay, before we go into the panel, you have now heard of all four types, right? And what I need to do in order to be prepared for next week when we're talking as a church, when we're looking at that, is I want to get a sense from the group what type you think your church is. So Jacob, if you could launch the poll so that everyone can see, and I want you to guess what type overall you think your church is. Do you think your church is Markan? Do you think your church is Matthean? Do you think your church is Lucan? Do you think your church is Johannine? Now, you're going to have all four types in any given church, but overall, if you were thinking about how the church operates, do they tend to kind of operate from a creative, sort of unbound space? Do they tend to be very mission focused? Then they're Mattheans. Do they tend to be really into those fellowship spaces, really warm and welcoming, especially to each other, maybe struggle a little bit with welcoming others, although that's not their intention? Or do they tend to be very much a teaching church, a very hierarchical church, and something that's very focused around Bible? So is the poll launched?
No, I was, now that you've gone through the explanation, now I'll launch the poll.
Okay, there we go. So.
Okay, you should see the poll on your screen now, and we'll leave it open for a little bit so you have some time to vote.
Yeah. And while y'all are voting, I'm going to tell you a funny story about why your Johannines are Johannines and not Johnnians. Which was a debate. You're going to hear a behind-the-scenes debate that happened between myself and my editor at Abingdon. For good reason. You can vote. Diana asked if there are two churches and they're not the same. You can vote on more than one type. So you can choose another option. But anyway, so Johannine is the academic way we talk about something related to the Gospel of John. Just like Lucan is for Luke, and Matthean is for Matthew, and Markan is for Mark. So Johannine is the academic understanding, but the editor, wanting, of course, to speak to a mass market audience, suggested that we looked at something like Johnian or Johannian to match Markan, Matthean, and Lucan. And I will remind you all that I am Markan Johannine. And I have these standards. I took a lot of advice from my editor. That was the one I held my ground on. I polled Facebook over it and came back to him and said, we're going to make all the academics furious if we do anything other than Johannine. And so 2 or 3 iterations went back. It went from being Johannine back to being Johannian, back to being Johannine, while we fought it out. And finally, I just said, "Look, I gotta hold this one." And he finally said, "All right, that's obviously this passionate thing for you." But it was a very Johannine reaction. To that. We don't do things that are not. My Johannine comes from the academic world, and I'll probably share a little bit about that. But okay, I think most of the voting has slowed down. Jacob?
Yes, I would say that you say that and 2 more people voted.
Okay.
So if you could please get those
more
final votes in. I'll cut it off in 15 seconds.
All right. And you can share the results with everybody when you're done.
4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, poll is closed. And the results are being shared now.
All right. So lots of Lucan churches out there. And again, if we prominently have Methodists on here, it's not surprising. It's also not surprising that Matthean's a good, strong secondary there. So next week, I will use Lucans as a model when we talk about how you get your church to all work together. If we have time, I'll also show Matthean. And then Markins and Johannines, I welcome any questions or comments that you have as we do that. But I'm going to use Lucans as a model so we can kind of see how that all works together. Okay, thanks, Jacob. You can take the poll away. And it's time for our panel to come in. So we have a wonderful panel tonight. I mentioned that I've got folks, we would have the East Coast covered. My poll is still up. Is everybody else's poll still up?
It's up on your end, Michelle, because you're
Okay.
a co-host.
Okay. Well, then I'll just make it go away. Okay. I made it go away. Yay. All right. So we have 3 panelists with us tonight. So Andrea Cummings is here. She is a pastor currently here in Little Rock for St. Luke, the campus of Pulaski Heights. But she is about to start as associate pastor at First Bentonville in Bentonville, Arkansas. So she's moving all the way up to the northwest corner. And Andrea was on the video. And if you've watched any of the videos, you'll learn that she actually scores even on all 4 types. But I wanted to have her here on our Johannine one. I wanted her on one of the panels. And so I grabbed her for the Johannine one because she and I relate a lot in Johannine terms. So I thought, this would be good. We'll have her on here for that. And then we have Darlene Meeder, who's here from Ripley, New York, believe it or not, as she says. And Darlene is starting the process. She's a certified lay speaker right now. Is that right? Lay minister. And then she's starting the process to become a licensed local pastor, for those of you that are familiar with that process in the Methodist Church. And then we also have Wes Shelton here, who is a layperson from Branchville United Methodist Church in Branchville, New Jersey. So, and Darlene and Wes are both real close Johannine Lucans. And like I said, Andrea's a 4-typer. I am Mark and Johannine. So, as I mentioned, sometimes Johannines are hard to find in the Methodist world. And the reason is because we move our pastors too often. And Johannines really love to latch on to pastors. So not surprising that Johannine was low on our votes on those numbers, and not surprising if you're feeling kind of alone out there, Johannines. I get it. I feel you. We all feel you. And it's a struggle to be in a denomination that moves their pastors often into be Johannine. So we'll just name that reality. So, so I would like to now open it up to our panelists and say, what characteristics of this type seem to fit you best, and how do they fit? Somebody? Okay, yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things that resonate with me for Johannine is a lifelong learner and loving to learn. It's many times I catch myself like at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and I'll just catch myself doing something like learning, and I'll screenshot it and send Michelle. I'll say, I'm so Johannine. So it just random stuff. It didn't matter, books everywhere, all over my house, on my Kindle, whatever. It's just something is in me, and it drives me as a pastor, as a leader, just in
Andrea's internet comes and goes, which is, we talked about beforehand. It's crazy because she's in the middle of Little Rock. So, are we back?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so I don't know where I stopped off. But.
So you books everywhere, Kindles, always, yeah.
So just love to learn, and it's a part of me wanting to be prepared as a leader, and to be that expert, and being prepared, and not saying an expert in the as a standoffish kind of way, but just being prepared to lead people. And so that resonates with me the most. So
yeah. Darlene or Wes?
I find the lifelong learner is probably the biggest thing for me. I've always loved going to take classes or do something But I mean, the other thing, and I just realized it tonight, you mentioned that the connection with youth. Right out of the starting gate, when I was just home from the Air Force and 22 years old, I was a 4-H leader. And I did that for 20 years. And then I went on to be an EMT instructor, and then on to teaching the children's message in church. So I have a very good connection to children that seems to resonate with me.
Yeah. Darlene, what about you?
I think it's the learning too, and like I said to you earlier, because I left the church when I was 13, my parents bought a camper and we went camping instead of going to church. And then I got married at 18 and found out 2 years after that my husband was a non-believer. And so it was very hard for me to get back into going to church and stuff. So I never went to church until I was like 42. So my learning really started about then, and I never wanted to go to college. It was like, no way, that was not me. It was hard for me for school. I had to really study to learn, to grasp it all, you know. But once I started reading the Bible, and once I started doing different things and doing Bible studies, it was like I couldn't get enough. And it was like I needed to learn from others who knew more than I did. So that's why I'm Johannine. Now, had I been in the church all my life, I wouldn't have been that way. I do believe that's from reading the book and listening to everybody. I think that's why I am the way I am.
Yeah.
And, you know, and listening to Pastor Craig telling me that God is working here, and I think to myself, he's crazy. But it always worked out that God was working, and you know, he had me take the first class, the basic lay speaking class, and oh, don't you want to take another one? No. Well, I take another one, and then I end up doubling up. I take one at the church, I take one online, and then I do 2 or 3 online, and you know, by then I'm a certified lay speaker, and now I'm a certified lay minister. So yeah, it's the learning and, you know, being at Jesus' feet. To be in Israel last year was the ultimate being at Jesus' feet.
Yes.
When I walked in to the places where he preached, where he walked, was such I cried almost every place I went to, you know, especially being on the Sea of Galilee and being on the beach where he told the fishermen to throw the net on the other side, and they caught the 153 fish.
Mm-hmm.
I was on
the end of Gospel of John, you mean?
Yeah, the end of Gospel of John. I was on that beach where he sat and where he had the fish and the fish cooking and the bread, and you know, I think about that now when I read the Bible, it comes to life to me.
Right.
And I want to go back, but I don't know whether I will ever be able to. I hope I can.
Yeah.
But it was the experience of a lifetime.
Yeah.
I had to work. I worked 6 months, 65 hours a day, or a week, 65 hours a day, 65 hours a week without a day off to earn the money to go on that trip.
Right. Because being at the feet, it really making that come alive is very, very important. And it's important for everybody, but again, it's going to have a different kind of resonance with Johannines. Like I've noticed some of the chat that's been going on, people have been talking about that somebody mentioned that you mentioned that your life experiences have shaped you into your type. Someone has echoed that, but also that's what's been going on in the chat is this sort of description of all the degrees that people have. And that's the Johannine in me. That's where it's most reflected in me. Is 4 degrees, right? I have a bachelor's in English and French, a master's in comparative literature, a master of divinity, a PhD in religious studies. And I loved school. I was in school for 33 years, as long as Jesus walked the planet, right? I was in school. As a student, I have been in school as a teacher beyond that, but as a student, I was in school for 33 years. So yeah, it is that definitely that lifelong learning that's just so important to Johannines. Any of the characteristics of Johannines not resonate with you? Any of them where you're like, oh, I'm not really sure that one's.
I think some of the youth, I think we did an after school program at our church for a little while, and we were pretty much babysitters.
Yeah.
So I would say at that experience, that was not good.
Yeah.
But once we got through to some of these kids, you know, my first night there, this one little boy, he comes right up to me and he gets up on my lap and he's all friendly, you know. Well, then I find out he is one of the worst ones, and he's just seeing what he can get away with. And, you know, but by the time we got through, halfway through this after-school program, him and his brother had come around so much that the change in them was incredible. And
Right.
I'm like, okay, maybe I can do this. But because at the beginning, I'm thinking, now I know why I take care of old people.
Right.
And not children.
So maybe not as much to youth, but for you, but obviously that one-on-one interaction that you were able to have was helpful. Wes, Andrea, what about y'all? Any of them that maybe don't resonate as much with you?
Yeah. I think in one of your in the book it talks about susceptible to tyrants or narcissists, and no, so that one I really don't. Yeah.
I think that your balance of the 4 types helps check that, because one of the things that I say is helpful for Johannines when it comes to keeping a tyrant or narcissist in check is to have markings. So you've got a good mark-in blend in you, so you can kind of recognize that. Wes, how about you? Anything that?
I think the close circle that you talk about with, you know, with others and then others,
Mm-hmm.
This is probably the Lucan, because I'm equally Lucan Johannine. I don't tend to do that. I don't want to do that. I want my circle to be open to everyone, and I try to reach out that way. I don't close that off.
Yeah, and I think that's the Lucan part of you, balancing that out, right? And it's really hard to explain that characteristic of Johannines without making it sound mean. It's not mean. It is honestly that they will welcome folks in, but they have these expectations, and one of which is belief. And in some cases, in some Johannine churches, it's you follow you line up with a creed, right? You believe all these things. Some of them have you sign off on statements of faith, right? And if you can't sign off on the statement of faith, then you're fine, but you're not a member, you're not that sort of thing. Those kinds of requirements are there. And one of the things that I want us to remember in this is that Jesus has to reach all kinds of people, right? And that really works for some folks. It really does reach them. And it really doesn't reach others, right? Which is why we have this balance of different types. So when it comes to thinking in terms of your Johannine side, what do you wish other people understood about you better, the other types?
It would have to be that I'm not mean and arrogant, that I'm not domineering. I know, and specifically I can relate times where I've come off that way, but that was never my intent. And I don't understand. I mean, some of it comes, there's some other influences from the Mathene or whatever, where I want to get things done. You know, I have this expectation and I want to see it done, and I will just go ahead and bully on through it. But that's not me being arrogant. It's just my expectations.
Right. And I think you've talked about being an EMT, that you can see a need to at times be firm about that because it's life and death situations, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. Darlene, Andrea, anything, what do you want folks to understand about you and your Johannines?
I guess for me, it's like, going back to the expert piece and making sure I have all the knowledge before I move forward. And so that's one of my growing edges is, I know enough. I don't have to read every single book on a topic before I go out. And so sometimes it can come across I'm moving slow, but I'm not moving slow. I'm just making sure I know what I'm talking about. So that's one of the things is like, no, I'm really working really hard behind the scenes, putting all my hours in.
Yeah.
But I can be slow on that whole piece, but yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Darlene? What do you wish people understood?
Well, I think with me, I am who I am. I am, people, when they meet me, they know that I am who I am, and I don't pull any punches. I am who I am, and I don't hide anything. Now, I used to when I was married. I mean, I've been divorced for 7 years, and I was not myself. I was hiding myself for years because my husband was very verbally and emotionally abusive. So I couldn't be myself around him. And so now that I have become myself again, I'm me. I am, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You have a confidence about yourself, right?
I do. And,
right.
And if I don't know something, if somebody asks me something, if I don't know it, I'll find out for them. And if somebody asks me to pray, I do it. I didn't used to. I met this woman at a gas station. I only barely knew her. And she said to me, "Can you pray for me?" And I said, "Sure." I grabbed a hold of her hands and we stood right there at the gas pump and I prayed for her.
Right.
And that was 10 years ago. And she still remembers that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have done that before I accepted Jesus. I would never have done that. But now I don't care where I'm at. If somebody asks for prayer, I do it. Because
right.
You know what? If you just say, "Oh, yeah, I'll pray for you," you might not. But if you grab a hold of them and say, "Let's pray right now," they know that you mean business.
Right. Well, and I think your training in lay servant ministry also has built that confidence, right?
Yes.
Right. So it speaks to the Andrea's piece about the expert, right?
Yes.
You've gotten a confidence about that, and you're not ashamed of it.
Nope, I'm
right?
not.
Right?
Nope. I would pray for my ex-husband.
Yeah.
I would. If he was in trouble, I would go to him and pray with him.
There you go.
He might not like it very well, but I would do it.
Right. I want to bring another piece together. So Andrea mentioned that she's not susceptible to narcissists and tyrants, but then Darlene, you shared your experience in your marriage, and you can see how if you really are Johannine and you're looking for someone strong, it is easy sometimes to fall prey in those situations. So you probably learned something about yourself in that as well. So I want to address something that's happening in the chat, which is that people are surprised they're not more Johannine because they are lifelong learners. I want to say that I want to kind of again point to what's your motivation for learning, and that's where you get this thing. So Johannines really are motivated by, like I said, this sort of soaking in the wisdom of the world. They just want to have this knowledge readily available, and love to soak it up from other people, love to then be able to pass it down to others. And it's very much in that exchange of wisdom, exchange of knowledge space. Mattheans, a lot of you are saying, "I'm Matthean, but I'm also a lifelong learner." Mattheans also, remember I mentioned the Gospel of Matthew, very teaching focused. Mattheans are also very focused on learning, usually with the purpose of, what does this now equip me to be able to do? So that's the thing. It's a difference in the motivation, and even like Lucans and Markins can get inspired to learn about something, to learn a new technique of something that they want to try and put in place because they want to try something creative and energetic, and something has lit their fire for a moment. I'll tell you how I'm marking Johannine with regards to these books. I have read most of the introductions of these books, right? Because I get really excited about learning about things, and then we lost Darlene. I hope she comes back. I get really excited about the stuff, the knowledge that's in it, and then I lose attention. So I've not read all of these books. I've read most of the introductions. And so that's how you can kind of see. You can be a lifelong learner and not be a Johannine. It's the question of the motivation of the learning, and that it's really learning for learning's sake in a Johannine perspective. So, okay, I do hope Darlene pops back to us any second here. But I want to also sort of let me check in with Asha. Asha, what's popping up in the Q&A?
There are a few questions. So here's one. Does it mean that Johannines are kind of perfectionists? More than Markins' attitude.
Are kind of what?
Perfectionists.
Johannines? How do you feel? Are you perfectionists?
I'm not answering.
Well,
That's a perfect answer.
Hey, no judging. No, I don't know. I have a smidge of that, I think. Yeah. Well, I'm an Enneagram 3 too, so it kind of all goes together.
Well, I'm an Enneagram 1, so so certainly a perfectionist. Wes,
I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist, but I don't expect it out of other people. I guess because I've been so disappointed through life. But I expect it out of myself, and that I wouldn't necessarily say as a perfectionist. I just have trouble accepting that I don't quite do entirely what I want to do.
Right. It's the expectations piece, right? We have high expectations of others and ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to go back to what the motive for perfectionism is. So if you're preparing to teach or to preach or whatever, it's not necessary that you just want to make sure that you are doing your best, and that your best is leading people and teaching people so they can also go on to learn as well. So the motive behind it is not self-centered, is for me, for the benefit of other people. So right. Yeah.
I can add a little anecdote to this. I do the children's message once a month. And we have this one young man who's probably a Johannine. He just turned 8. He will hijack you in the middle and just run. And the congregation just loves it. But it takes away from me with my planned lesson and my planned talk and story. And I have to adapt to that. And when I'm done, I always feel like, gee, I could have done better. But people always come up to me afterwards and tell me how much that message meant to them because of where it went and what the little guy did to it. Right. It made it more impacting.
And you're probably more ready for that than the average person would be because of that preparation piece, right? So yeah, I mean, it's
Oh, you can't really prepare for him. He just believe me, the statements are off the wall.
Well, God bless you for being in that space. Asher, what else is in the Q&A?
Okay, here's the next one. Does those Methodist churches who experience long pastorates trend toward being Johannine churches?
So from the work that I've done, Andrea's church is actually one of the ones that I've tested that's had a longer run pastor. More Johannines there than the average run. So yes, large churches in the Methodist tradition tend to keep their pastors for longer, and they tend to draw a larger percentage of Johannines, probably due to that. It may also be that large church pastors, some of them are going to be Johannine. Johannines and Mattheans in particular have the capacity to really thrive in those spaces. Lucans, it's harder. They can do it. Michael Roberts, who was on our panel last week, he's a large church pastor here in Arkansas. But it's what's hard for Lucans to do is that they really want to be in relationship with everybody, and a large church, that'll exhaust you if you're Lucan. And then Markins, again, it depends on if they feel called into that space or not. So that's what tends to drive them. But because Mattheans are so action focused and Johannines are so leadership focused, they tend to do really well in those spaces. What's next, Asha?
So next it says, so if I'm Matthean first and Johannine, this explains why I often crave learning, but put it off to work on something else. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, the action piece for the Matthean would have you, what can your focus is going to be, what can I do right now? And if you're already prepared to do, or you just need a little bit of learning to get to the to-do piece, then you might not go as deep as if you had extra time to allot that. So, yeah.
Okay, here's a good one.
Okay.
Does your perfectionism get in the way of developing stronger faith muscles?
We all got to answer this one.
Here, faith muscles?
Faith muscles, yeah. Do you want them to clarify faith muscles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whoever wrote that question, please clarify faith muscles, and we'll come back to it.
That will be Gwendolyn Fink.
Okay. So Gwendolyn, clarify faith muscles for us, and we'll go in.
Okay, so I have another one. Thanks for the statement of contrasting perspective of Johannine being a high Christology, while others expand Trinitarian principles. I'm curious how this translates into conversations with ordination councils.
Andrea, you just went through this.
Let's see.
I can throw in one little thing while you're thinking about it, Andrea, if you want to add something in. I will say that someone served on our board of ordaining ministry who had done gospel discipleship, and she sat there the entire time. She was not on any of the interview teams. She was an observer. She sat there the entire time figuring everyone's discipleship types based on their answers. Hey, here comes Darlene. Yay! So I think that it would be helpful for such boards to do this kind of work. It will probably show if they have their own biases, and how they're maybe going to react with other people who have different perspectives of it. So, do you have anything to add on that, Andrea?
Yeah, I guess because I'm all for it. I guess my paperwork is pretty balanced, and around my conversation as well. So when he got to the question about, our understanding is Jesus is the Lord, that question. And yeah, so, just depending on the question, how I answered. And so you would say that high Christology is in that piece there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just depends. And sermons, well, and so it depends on the question and that balance of being all for. So, but yeah.
Okay. Darlene, we're glad to have you back. I guess
my power went out.
Oh no!
And my computer, it needs a new battery, so of course there's nothing.
Right. Oh no. Well, we're glad to have you back, but unfortunately, I got to flip over real quick and show a couple of things, and then we'll stay and take some more questions, answers. I think we'll have the faith muscles question clarified in just a second here. But I do want to show you all again a couple of things that we like to bring up each time. Where is my? I guess we'll go to screen. So let me hop out of here real quick. Well, sorry, that's not being agreeable. Okay, let me go back. So remember, with each of these times that you can go to gospeldiscipleship.net and again look under additional resources and download discipleship pathways. And basically what you're looking to do, sorry, my internet's running slow now. Lovely, we're having all these tech issues, right? When we're all perfectionists, we don't like this to happen. But if you go to the download discipleship pathways, you'll be able to see the Johannine pathway. And it's basically an arrow, right? So what you need to do is you need to be a mentor, and you need to, lovely internet's down. So I'll stop that. But you need to be a mentor, and you need to have a mentor. And so you in the realms of spiritual formation and witness, service, and worship. You want to make sure that you are mentoring someone in those fields, and then you also have a mentor. And one of the things that I tell Johannines to do, because Johannines get really stressed about serving as mentors, which they should be more confident in doing. Let me encourage the Johannines to be more confident in mentoring, because whenever I was in seminary, we had a shortage of Greek professors at one point, and the professor who was in charge of finding someone to fill in said, all I need is someone who's 2 chapters ahead of the students, because if you're 2 chapters ahead, you know more than the students know, and you can teach it. Now, no Johannine would agree to that, but trust me, you're 2 chapters ahead of some people in life. You can mentor people in that space. The other thing is that they're very picky about who they get to mentor them, because again, high expectations, and they oftentimes just want 1, maybe 2 mentors that they can really focus in on, and that's fine. Also remember that other ways to be mentored as a Johannine are to read books, to listen to podcasts, to those sorts of things. That's a mentoring space for Johannines as well. And then I do want to talk about Johannines coming out of quarantine. So which we've done with each one of these. So when it comes to Johannines in quarantine, how are they doing? It depends on how they view the leadership around them. Those that feel like their pastor, or they as the pastor, are responding well, are comfortable. Now, different Johannines are going to have different definitions of what responding well is. And that's the tricky thing, right? For those of you that are pastors, Johannines are the ones that are kind of getting in your face about this, right? They have a desire for what they want to happen, and they're gonna let you know, basically. And then. And that's why I say they will definitely have an opinion of whether or when churches should reopen. They will also likely be linked to a moral stance. This is not just they want to be open for some reason. There is a moral question behind it. And so if you've got a Johannine that's kind of anxious about getting back to church, or anxious about not getting back to church, and you want to have a conversation with them about it and kind of find out what's the moral stance that's behind that. And then one thing to remember about Johannines is as we reopen, they may be particularly well suited to guide those who are struggling with questions of identity. So if people have lost their jobs and they need to be nurtured in new skills, Johannines are going to be good go-to people for that. and you just want to empower them to be able to do that work and encourage them, because again, Johannines sometimes reticent about coming forward because they want to be expert at something. Also, while they've been in quarantine, they've probably been studying something. And so ask them what they've learned and what they can, and how they can share that with the congregation. They may have been trying to decide, well, if we can have online communion now, why can we have online communion now? And they may have done a lot of research on that. They may have been trying to decide what the purpose of the church is. They may have just done research on, how to do chainsaw sculpting. Who knows? But they've probably been doing something, and they can be a great resource to folks as we're coming out of quarantine. And the other wonderful thing that Johannines will do is they will help us keep Jesus and Scripture in the conversation, and because it will be so important to them. So they will always be kind of pointing in that direction. Okay. I do want to thank my panelists again. We're going to hang around and answer some more questions, but do appreciate everybody. And I muted you there for a second because we were getting some feedback. So I'm going to stop my share again and now unmute you all so that we can talk.
So I want to interject something.
Yeah.
Michelle, the reason that your website wasn't coming up is because it's currently down everywhere right now. Squarespace appears to be having technical issues, and that's why. So if you tried it at home and you were also unable to load the website, it's not just Michelle, it's not just Joel, it's apparently a Squarespace issue.
Okay, well, thank you, Jacob, for doing that research for us. It is 7:58. We are close to the time to end, so I know some of you need to go. Remember, next week we will be talking about how we work together, how we come together as a church, figure out what type we are, and then how all the types work together within that space. We're going to hear from a pastor that has put a discipleship system in place. We're going to hear from someone in a conference office who is talking about how to roll this out in a conference level, and then we'll invite all of your questions. But thanks again to Wes and Darlene and Andrea. Those of you that need to go, it was wonderful being with you, and we'll see you next week. Those of you that can hang around, and we'll answer some more questions. So, Marva, I love you want to open a post-pandemic support group to anyone who's suffering post-pandemic stress. Yes, no doubt. That's like the world right now. Okay, so Asha, I'll turn it back to you and see what's happening in the chat and the Q&A that we want to address.
Basically, we do have clarification on what faith muscle is, and that is actually just stronger faith.
Okay. So repeat the question is, how's being a perfectionist? Was that it, right?
Does your perfectionism get in the way of developing a stronger faith muscle?
Okay. So, and Darlene, you missed this part. This was part of when your electricity went. But somebody had asked if Johannines tend to be perfectionists, and we kind of hesitantly admitted, yes, that's true, because we have these high expectations, right, which we put on ourselves as well. Yeah. So what would you all say is a response to that? Does that keep us from growing, from strengthening our faith? What would you say?
I guess it depends on what it is. I mean, for me, like one of the prohibiting things of being a perfectionist is I write out a sermon, I need to say every single word that is written on my iPad or whatever. And so part of the market in me is to be governed by the Holy Spirit to move as the Holy Spirit moves. And so a part of my growing edge, I think it'll be a year in July that I've moved from manuscript preaching. And so I don't write things out anymore, kind of write my notes out and prepare a lot of hours. And so on Sunday, I can, let the Holy Spirit guide. It's not just on the fly type preaching, but it's, so Johannine, we prepare a lot. But it's also the mixture for me to let the Holy Spirit to market in me to kind of be in the preaching moment. So for me, it's a blend of both worlds, not the perfectionism so much, but letting the Holy Spirit and faith in the work of the Holy Spirit to be at work in that preaching moment for me. So the best way I can answer that question. Yeah.
Okay. What about Wes and Darlene? How would you say perfectionism works on growing your faith?
Well, for me, it's a push and a pull. At times, when I learn something new or gain another understanding of something that I've questioned, I feel the growth. I physically feel the faith growing in me. But at the same time, when I stub my toe on something, when I come across a holy mystery that I want to question and can never get an answer, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, and it's chipping away. It just doesn't quite feel right. So it's a push and pull.
Yeah. Okay. What about Darlene? You have any thoughts?
Well, I think, whoops, I smoked my table. I think with me, when I first started preaching, if I made a mistake, I completely fell apart. But now I just continue on, or I say, whoops, sorry, or, God's grace, or whatever. And so I guess I'm not quite as much of a perfectionist as I used to be, because I know I'm only human.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to do the sermon for this week, and it's Trinity Sunday, because I was trained to use the lectionary, I go to the lectionary and there's a little blurb there about it being Trinity Sunday. They said either you can say that it is either the second week second Sunday after Pentecost, or try to explain Trinity Sunday. Good luck with that. And I'm like, good luck with that. You're supposed to help me.
Right.
You're supposed to help me with this. So I'm like, fine. I read a little bit. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit help me. And I'm going to go with that. Because as I listened to the Episcopal Bishop Curry, he says, if you can't think of anything else, just preach love.
There you go. There you go.
I explained it like with an egg and with water,
Yep.
ice, seed, and that, and at the end I just said, believe in God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Just believe.
There you go. So I would say that my perfectionism at times helps me grow in my faith, and at times is an obstacle to me. And it has to do with kind of, is it pushing me forward, right? Is it helping? Is it urging me on to the next step, to learn more, to grow more, to that sort of thing? Because perfectionism can drive you in that direction, but it can do like what Darlene mentioned, which is when you make a mistake, everything grinds to a halt. And so I think you have to use the perfectionism in a way that makes it a moving forward instead of a punishing space, right, where everything stops. So, okay, Asha, what's next in the Q&A?
So we have, how are the dynamics of a Johannine Markin best utilized in a local church?
Well, I am Markin Johannine, so I can answer. So let me tell what I love about being Markin Johannine. The Johannine of me keeps me focused on the Markin passion. So it gives me a kind of longer drive. And personally, like what I think my strength is in ministry is that I get churches to push the envelope, and I have the leadership to kind of help them step into that. And I am able to do deep leadership development because I love the mentoring space, so I can kind of bring people along into that. I also know that they tend to get tired of me too, especially if it's a Lucan church. So that's good for me to be aware of. I will tell you where the tension is in in Markin Johannines, and that is in the hierarchies. So Markins smash hierarchies because Markins believe all people are gifted by the Holy Spirit. There is no one gift that's better than any other gift. So everyone should be on equal footing, and everyone should be welcome, and it should be a leveled out space. Johannines need a hierarchy in place. It's their comfort. That's how they understand. It's how they grow, is to know, who do I learn from next? Who do I learn from next? So I spend my life smashing hierarchies and then putting them back in place. So it's a bit of a struggle. So I think that helps, helps to understand all of the types, as we've mentioned every week, have their points of intersection where they work really well together. And then they all have their points where they bang. And we've heard some of that tonight, right? Like in our Johannine Lucans, who want to push against this idea that there's a closed group, right? So there's some tension in that. Okay, any other questions in the Q&A, Asha?
Not in the Q&A, but there's a couple in the chat.
Okay, what do we got in the chat?
So one in the chat is, how did Johannines relate to the current protests?
Okay.
And we kind of talked about this before going live, but I think we can address the people in the chat. Yeah.
And I think we actually talked about Mattheans and Lucans, and we didn't talk about Johannines. I have some thoughts on Johannines in this space, but does any of the panel want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about that before we got started. I mean, I'm just heartsick about it all. And, my heart goes out to the family of the young man that was killed. And I mean, even to the officer, we have to pray for everybody. Jesus said, pray for them all.
Mm-hmm.
But, I wish we could all come together as one, as God's children. I mean, and not look at each other as color, red, white, black, and yellow. We're all one. We all bleed the same color, and it just really breaks my heart that this has happened. And, I just pray for everybody,
Yeah. And I think, Darlene, that's really your Lucan side coming out on that. For Johannines.
My Lucan side when I get out is really going to be hugging people.
Right. So my sense from myself and for other Johannines that I have had conversations with about this is, and again, there's not going to be a clear falling one way or the other, but what Johannines tend to have in common is a strong desire for someone to lead with clarity.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah. One of the Johannines that I spoke with said, where are the prophetic voices? Where is the person stepping forward and giving us good, clear, sound, moral leadership? And there among the Johannines that I've spoken with, there is a sense that there's a vacuum there right now. There's not a lot of clear, solid leadership, moral leadership in place, and that's the frustration for Johannines. Andrea, would you add anything into that?
Yeah. So for me, it's like more the mentor, the teaching piece around that. It's for Johannines or for anyone that feels urge to do something. And so talking to people saying, okay, you don't need permission for anybody black to be prophetic or to go out to do whatever. And so my conversation has been around that, this is the time to shine. This is time to be that leader, to be the voice of change outside of the African-American voice leading things. And so for my white brothers and sisters and everybody else around the fight, it's been around that, giving, encouraging people to step up to fill this, people are saying, where's the leader? You are the leader, and so how do we go about having those conversations and stepping it back and then, giving this little support to do that,
Right. Your answer was such a 4-type answer. There was a little Matthean in there. There was a little Markin in there. There was a little Lucan in there. There was a little Johannine in there.
It was. Right. I'm not a good person to answer right now, I guess.
Right. Okay, what else? What else is in the chat, Asha?
I think this is the last one, but the question is, I wonder if there are more lectionary preachers of one type.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, Andrea, you have some thoughts on that?
Hey, I am a lectionary preacher to the heart, and but I do some summer series here and there. I think I did two here and there. I don't do back to back, maybe 2 a year summer series. I'm a lectionary preacher.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting question. I would like to do some research on this. This is my Johannine response, right? I would love to research this. But I think, again, we go to the question of, I'm not sure that it was going to break by types. I think it's going to break by motivation. So if a Markan feels strongly that the Spirit is in the lectionary, then a Markan is liable to preach lectionary. Whereas if a Markan feels led to do a series or led to preach on this or that other thing, then they might diverge from that. And a Matthean could very easily be led into lectionary because it's part of that church structure, right? And we talked about Mattheans are the churchiest of the types. They really like the systems of the church and the traditions of the church and that sort of thing. And so a Matthean might preach lectionary because that's what the church does. Whereas they also might do a sermon series because maybe that's what their church has done. That's been the model for them. And then Lucans, I think it would be a question of, does the lectionary bring them in relationship with all the Christian community because everybody's working on this at the same time versus, well, what does my community need? Right? What's going to speak to the needs of my community? A Johannine might be a lectionary preacher because that's the study, right? It draws us into Scripture and keeps us disciplined into Scripture in a particular way. Doesn't allow us to as much have a Bible within a Bible. Johannine might very well also say it does not teach the whole Bible. And so I want to look at the whole Bible. And in order to do that, I'm not doing lectionary. I will look at the parts that are in the lectionary, but also the parts that aren't. So I think that would be the greater piece, is to understand what's the motivation for why are you preaching the lectionary versus not. And that'll probably be the breakover there. All right, anything else pop up? Somebody wants Andrea to run for office.
The marketing person being prophetic, I don't know.
Okay, well, thanks again to my wonderful panel for staying around, and thank you so much to the attendees who stuck around as well. I am very much looking forward to us wrapping up. I'm going to miss you all after next week, but very much looking forward to wrapping this up by talking about how we do this all together. Thank you, Wes, Darlene, Andrea, Asha, Jacob, the man behind the curtain. It was wonderful to be with you all and to share in our discipleship understanding together. It's great to have some fellow Johannines there with me. So thank you again, folks that hung around, and we will see everybody next Wednesday. Blessings for your week.
Blessings to you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.